Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another chapter of Experiencer Interviews. And today we've got another amazing soul coming to us from the US. We have Kathy Cogliano today. From early childhood, Kathy has had experiences all throughout her life, starting at the age of 6. Her grandfather appeared on the TV screen and started talking to her. At the age of 10, she had a UFO encounter while walking to school. Later on in life, she would live out many experiences, such as a levitation experience, a shadow people experience, seeing a leprechaun come into her room, a bolt of light coming in through the ceiling into her office, visions at sacred sites, past life and paranormal experiences, spirit communication, UFO encounters, and an amazing meeting with a Hathor being during a trip to the Queen's Chamber of the Great Pyramid in Egypt. So, Kathy, thank you so much for coming on.
You are welcome. It's an honor to be here with you. Thank you.
Before we get into your story, are you aware if any of your relatives or siblings perhaps might have had experiences like yourself?
No, no. I do recall my mother, who's now no longer with us, reference a great grandmother, who had what they called in Ireland the knowing. And she used to read tarot for people. Maybe some of that came through the DNA.
I see, I see. Well, let's get into your story. I believe your experiences started at the age of 6.
I started young. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's the one you referenced, with my grandfather. Yeah, that was quite something. Yeah.
What happened?
You know, my grandfather was very close to him. We called him Grampy. He got very ill and he had to be hospitalized. And my parents took us kids to go see him. The hospital would not let us in to see him. And so he came to the window. We stood outside of his hospital window on a hill and we were waving to him and he's waving back. And go home that night, go to bed. I awake in the middle of the night. I sit up and I look over to the left, and in a TV that we had on a TV stand, not a huge TV, was my grandfather fully filling the screen from like here, very animated, talking to me. And I looked over and I was like, oh my God. I looked over to see if my sister, who was in the twin bed next to me, saw anything or was awake. Nope, she's sound asleep. And I dove under the covers. I didn't know what to think. Only to that following morning have my dad call us kids down to tell us that Grampy had died that night. So, in the years I've had to share this story and talk about it with different folks, I really do believe he came to me at a point where he was transitioning. I don't think he had died. I think he was in process of that because of how strongly he came through. But I have to say to you, a lot of people who hear that story are fascinated. At that point in time, which was probably the 60s, I'm guessing, for my grandfather in spirit to use technology and the TV in particular, which was rather a somewhat new thing, he was pretty savvy in spirit, especially transitioning and taking the time to come visit me and my TV screen in my room. I often thought I look at that now as very cool. He was an awesome, cool guy. Very, he was an explorer. He, cross country on the first uh motorcycle, one of the first motorcycles in the US. And he climbed Mount McKinley. He was a cool guy. Um, so what was interesting is when they had his wake, that following week of my sighting, and my parents allowed us kids to go into the wake. And I'll never forget, as long as I live, I walked in and I looked down the room and there's my grandfather all laid out in his casket. Well, I stopped and I started screaming, Grampy's not dead. He's not dead. I just saw him. I know he's not dead. Well, they kind of had to get me out of there because I was creating a bit of a scene and had to go back to my grandparents' house. But, he comes through. He comes through numerous times, and in spirit. Others have seen him, other mediums. He comes through with the sweet smell of tobacco. He used to hand roll his own cigarettes. So, Yeah, so that kicked everything off, honestly. That was remarkable. But you know what's funny? I never told my parents that experience, though I don't know why. But yeah, that was the first paranormal experience.
Do you recall the actual conversation that you had with your grandfather?
No, what was interesting is I couldn't hear him. As animated as he was, I knew he was talking to me, but I couldn't hear him. I do now, in communicating to the spirit realm, I can hear. I can hear the communications. So it's interesting that that young, I was not able to hear him. Um, yeah.
Now, your grandfather used technology to contact you. Now this is I've personally know two people who had deceased loved ones contact them by using the telephone. So yeah, that's a like a
Sadly, over on the other side, I had a woman come through the telephone lines, in spirit. That was an interesting visitation. But yeah, no, they absolutely can use technology. At least that's been my experience. It's remarkable when you think about it. Yeah.
and so your next experience would be also at the age of 6. You had an OBE.
Yeah, I was even younger than that. I was probably about 5. So my out of body experience was, I'm on a swing and I'm laying on the swing on my stomach. I'm just kind of swinging when all of a sudden I'm up above my body looking down. And the first thought in my head was, wow, I have a good, healthy body in this lifetime. Now, what 5-year-old would kind of think that? So that was very strange. So I most certainly had that thought that I'm back in my body. And it was like this kind of like that rushed feeling of just, and I continue to swing. And, it's just one of those things. I never questioned it. I had no fear. It was just a very kind of cool, unusual experience. The next one happened again when I was a child, when I was probably about 10. And walking to up to a little corner store we had with a friend, and we're walking across the driveway of the elementary school I went to, stepped off the walkway, and all of a sudden, again, I am way up above my head, looking down. I can see us walking. I could see us talking. I couldn't hear us, though. That was an interesting fact. And, I'm crossing the driveway. As soon as I stepped up to get back on the walkway is when I rushed back in my body. And that rush back in was a lot more jarring than the one I had when I was younger. So much so that I kind of misstepped and almost fell over. And my friend Maureen, kind gets me and says, "Are you okay?" And I said, "Yeah, I'm okay." So again, I don't say anything about the experience. I look back on that and I don't know. I don't know if that was a built-in protection thing. I'm not sure. But yeah, those two out-of-body experiences as a child were interesting.
Do you know why in both instances? Why? Was there something that triggered you to actually have these OBEs?
No, no, that's what's strange. No. No, so I don't know. If anybody could figure it out, I really don't know. Is it an oversoul thing? For some reason, I had to see myself at that moment in time. I don't know. But interesting, the one when I was 5 and having the thought of I have a good body in this lifetime. Now, fast forward. I, I do believe in reincarnation. I do believe in past lives. I know many of my past lives. So it's interesting that there was a part of me that was examining who I was at 5, I think, and at 10.
Well, it's definitely one hell of an experience because having that as a child, it makes you question things, at least later on in life, I believe.
Yeah. Oh, and, looking back, knowing a lot of what I know now, they are, kind of remarkable experiences. I still don't understand fully why. But I treasure the experience nonetheless, one of many extraordinary experiences. Yeah, and then fast forward, my dad was a career Marine. We're stationed at the nuclear sub base in Groton, Connecticut, New London, Connecticut, and Groton, Connecticut. And I'm walking to school. And I'm in fourth grade. So that's what, 10, 11. And I'm by myself, which is unusual because usually I have a brother and sister. I would have thought we'd be walking together, but for whatever reason, I'm alone this morning. And beautiful, bright, sunny morning. I'm by myself, and right ahead is the school. I could see the school from where I was. And I looked up, and ahead of me is this massive cigar-shaped craft, just hovering right above where the school is. So it's between me now and the school, and just hovered there, no sound. I'll never forget seeing the sunlight, the morning sunlight, glint off this bright, shining silver ship. And it just was like flashing, the sunlight off of it. And, again, no sound, but there were like these black edges to it. And I just stood there in absolute awe. And then all of a sudden I had this feeling, oh my gosh, I'm late for school. So I start running to school. The minute I do that, the craft disappears. So I don't, I look back on that, and every time I talk about it, I have the same question. Could there have been missing time? I was late for school. I didn't get in trouble for it. I wasn't that late, but I definitely was late for school. So, was there an abduction piece to this story? I honestly don't know. I don't know. I don't have recall of that if there was. But what's interesting, you know, uh, James Fox, who I'm sure you're aware of, is a filmmaker and documentary maker specializing in paranormal UFO sightings. And his aerial school topic he covered in one of his documentaries. He presented to a private group I belonged to. And what was fascinating was he was saying very often these craft and these alien beings will appear at schoolyard settings to children. And I spoke to James, and I shared with him my experience, and he said, yeah, he said, I can't tell you. He said, there is such a connection with the alien beings and wanting to communicate and show themselves to the children. So I thought that was kind of interesting. And I think too, I was living on a nuclear subbase, and that's a key component. That is the nuclear connection with the galactics. Yeah. So there's that to tie in with that story. So yeah, I often wonder, well, one of these days will I get a recall on that experience? Maybe when I'm ready at a point, they will let me recall that. But for now, it's a big question. Not sure.
Do you recall how large the craft was?
Oh, it was large. Um, yeah, it spanned the whole kind of horizon in front of me. But yet I could just still see the school beyond it. Um, it was large. Yeah, and I have seen many crafts since. In fact, I just had a sighting about 2 weeks ago. Full on craft. So they, I communicate to them. I call them my galactics. And they often will come. I'll step out my courtyard at night, and they, 9 times out of 10, will let me see them. They'll usually flash lights, letting me know it's them, because I ask, are you there? Can you let me know you're there? So yeah, and they will often oblige. So it's kind of cool.
So you never really talked about these experiences to your folks.
No, and here's my dad, a career Marine. And no, but what's cool about the encounter I had at the school there is that I looked up the UFO activity for the sub base there, for the nuclear sub base. And for 100+ years, there have been sightings in that area. Now, I shouldn't say 100, but it's been there quite a while, that nuclear sub base. And there's a lot of activity, a lot of sightings around that particular base for many, many, many years. So that was interesting. Didn't surprise me. But, again, with the nuclear connection, I think is key.
Now, you've shared with me like a list of experiences you had as an adult, but during your teens, did anything happen?
For the most part, it was quiet. Definitely quiet on the UFO front. I had one intriguing experience, paranormal experience of, when we went away and we stayed I was probably in a junior in high school. So I was like 15 or so. And we stayed at this antique, beautiful farm up in New Hampshire. My dad had a friend who owned this farm. We all went out for a little weekend. And I, was instantly drawn to the beautiful big hearth that was in the house. The house was really to the period. So the house was built in the early 1800s, and I'm drawn to this whole mantle fireplace area. We were all sitting, in the room, end of the day, kind of chatting. And my dad's friend Paul says to us kids, "Hey, do you want to see something cool?" And we're like, "Yeah." So he goes up to where the fireplace is, and on the side wall of the fireplace, he taps this panel, and the panel slides open. And, of course, my brother and sister are like, "Whoa," they jump into the room. There's a small room, empty room back there. I look at the room, and I see a room full of what I just knew to be black slaves. And we're talking, God bless them, the souls, they were just all crammed into this room. Men, women, children, mostly women and children. And there was this young man who was front and center, must have been, the, tight to the door. And he and I looked at one another, and I just thought, I saw such fear in his eyes. And I thought, "Oh my God, what am I looking at?" And then that's when Paul, who said to me, "This is a room. This house was on oh God, what's it called? The railway, there, where they would help rescue, the African American slaves, and bring them up to Canada." So, that house was one of the houses that they took refuge in, and they would hide, some of these slaves that they were then, because that was up in New Hampshire, so that's not that far from the Canadian border. So that was remarkable to see that. And then, of course, they're calling me in the room. I would not go in the room. I actually had to go outside. It was so disturbing to see what I saw in that room. So other than that, that experience, it was kind of quiet until, quite a while actually.
So, at what age did your levitation experience happen?
Wow, that's the experience that I had chatted with you about. So this experience, again, I don't even know how to interpret it because it's so multi-level. So it starts with I'm in bed, the dog's curled up at my feet, sound asleep, and all of a sudden I hear this incredible harp music. And I'm thinking, "Oh, God, did I leave on the TV?" And I have an armoire in front, and I look over, and I just move my eyes, and I realize I'm in sleep paralysis. And I look over at the TV's off, but I am hearing this incredible harp music. I mean, if you had to have a sound that came from heaven, like, they talk about the angels and the harp. Well, I tell you, I thought, "Oh God, am I dying? Am I dead?" Because then I notice and realize I'm encased in this beautiful golden light, and I'm levitated off the bed. So I'm about this high off the bed, and in my crown chakra, if you're laying down, this energy is shot through the headboard of the bed into my crown chakra, going through my body at such a fast pace. It was like I was like this. It was just, and I can remember telepathically, like screaming, if that's possible. And it said, "You got to stop. This is way, way too much energy." And it did dissipate a bit. And the sleep paralysis is awful. I don't know if you've ever experienced that. So I'm fully sleep paralyzed. And all of a sudden, I can move my eyes. I look over to the window to the right of my bed, and I see this leprechaun jump into the room. 3D. He was only about this thick. 3D, full on alive. I mean, but goes through the window pane, not breaking it, but just comes in the room through the window pane. That's when the dog puts her head up. She wakes up. She was asleep the whole time I'm having all this other stuff going on. And that leprechaun jumped in the room. She wakes up. She sees it. And she bark, 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 bark. She jumps off the bed. This thing now is running through my bedroom. So and as soon as all this happens, I'm no longer encased in this light. I'm no longer levitated. I'm back on the bed. I can hear, I can move. And I thought, oh my God. So I get up too. And I'm chasing after her and after a leprechaun at my house. And only to have it disappear somehow, somewhere. And she was adamant. She was going to every corner of every room, and she was just, really trying to find this thing. But, as we chatted, I said to having her see this, chase it, know it's real, validates the experience. But honestly, I don't know what the rest of that experience was, to be quite honest. I do believe that, there are times when whoever they are, will work on us. And I do believe that that was some type of maybe a healing. But, the energy coming through me, so something was going on there. I'd like to think it was a healing. But very much a very energetic experience, to say the least.
Do you believe that you might have seen like another reality, or it could have been like a possible screen image of a being doing something on you?
I honestly don't know. I truly, honestly don't know. It could be. I don't know. All I know is what's interesting is that it happened. I wasn't asleep. I was awake. Um, but I have to tell you, I have had a conversation with one other woman who's actually a member of MUFON, and I shared this story, and she went, "You you heard the heart music?" And I said, "Yeah." She says, "I've heard the heart music too." I was like, "Oh my God." So other people out there are having some of these experiences. I mean, again, that was validating for me to have her hear the heart music. And she had the same reaction I did. It sounded otherworldly, stunningly beautiful music. And again, my experiences with different healing modalities, sound and vibration is key in many of these healing modalities that are used now, that are being more recognized now as well, and healing as a recognized healing tool. Sound. So yeah, that again, these things happen, and unless some of your listeners, have thoughts and ideas, I'd love to hear them, because, that's another one where I just don't honestly know what that was all about.
Yeah, these otherworldly stories are amazing. Let's talk about your shadow people experience. What happened?
Ooh, yeah, that was at the Butterfly Hill Farm. That was in Tennessee, in the Smoky Mountains of Tennessee. I was there with friends, a whole group of us. We went to visit, these friends who have the farm, and the farm was a very old farmhouse, on very, very old land, old Native American land. And they were surrounded by woods. Literally, this farm was cut into the mountain hillside. Beautiful place. And there were paths through the woods. So me and two other, gentlemen, we went off to explore. So in the woods, all of a sudden, I start hearing these clicking sounds and whistles, and I'm going, "What the heck?" And they're not hearing it. So then all of a sudden, I have a whole group in spirit of Native American men, uh, who are making these clicking and whistling sounds, communicating to each other as they go through, and you could feel the rush of them going by you. It was remarkable. The other guys could feel the rush of them going by, but they couldn't see them. So, long story short, we had a few experiences in the woods. It was very active, that whole area. And we go back in and into the farmhouse, and they prepared a lovely dinner. So we're all, gathered in a great room. And I'm standing there next to a dear friend, Loretta, and I look straight ahead, and I see this group of shadow people going walking in a group, going across the wall in front of me. And I thought, "Oh, am I really seeing this?" And I look over to Loretta and I said, "Do you see this?" She's like, "Yeah, I see them." And it was remarkable because they felt very peaceful. I just knew intuitively they were Native Americans. Some of them you could tell were wrapped in blankets. Some had hats. You can tell there was a mix of men and women by their shape. Um, but the overall feeling was one of peace. There was no fear for either one of us seeing this. So I, told my friend who owned the farm, I said, "Gosh," I said, "have you ever had any experiences?" And she knew I had told her about my experience in the woods. So they had already, said that there was a lot of Native American spirit activity around the farm and that they have seen some things or heard some things themselves. And when I brought up that we saw a group of the shadow people, she said, "Oh my gosh." She said, "I'm so glad you told me that you saw them too, because they have been seeing them in the house." And they were afraid of them. It really brought them fear because they didn't know what they were seeing. They didn't know if they were malevolent or benevolent. So it was just, so I said to her, "No." And Loretta was there too. We said, "No, we did not get a feeling at all that these were anything to be afraid of, just that they're a group of spirits who are of the land and they are protecting you and the land and the animals and that this is their home too." And they felt very relieved. It really was a nice sighting to have and be able to take away the fear level there. Um, and they, any other experience that they had, they did sell the farm shortly after our experiences, but they never had anything. Again, they felt comfortable with knowing that they're there for protection. So they never had any other encounters that were that brought on fear or anything. So that was a cool experience there. Beautiful land. Oh my gosh. So yeah, it was interesting that from what I've learned of that experience, talking to others who have had shadow people experience, they they were there for protection. They were there out of, love for the land. So there was no negative feeling around them. And unlike a lot of people with a shadow experience, and very seldom do you have them appear in a group. So that was unique on that sighting was that it was a group of shadow people. Very interesting. And to see them move together, they're working, they're just kind of there. And yeah, that was a neat experience.
Hmm. Are you aware if there are any like burial grounds in the area?
Where the farm was? No, not particularly, but I wouldn't be surprised if there was. Because, the I learned after the fact, the path that we went down through the woods, where I had the first encounter with the Native Americans in spirit, um, that's a very, very old path. So that, even the, fur trappers coming down from Canada would go through those woods, and we did find the remains of a cabin, and I did have some more experience with all of a sudden, I'm hearing some men speaking French. I'm like, "What is this?" And I said to the guys with me, I'm like, "Do you hear that?" And they're like, "No. Oh god, no. What now?" And I'm like, "Well, I am hearing a man speaking French." And then all of a sudden, we're at the remains of this cabin and I'm shown that, he was a fur trapper and that was the remains of his cabin. And when I went into the farm, again it was confirmed. They said yes, they had been told that, this was land that the Native Americans would use coming through trapping as well as the French. So, yeah, it was a very interesting place. That was a cool day.
Amazing. I love these stories. Uh,
Thanks.
you've had an experience with a beam of light, a ball of light coming through the ceiling?
Yeah, yeah, and that was, a remarkable experience. I was upstairs in my office at my other house prior to this home, and I'm sitting at my desk. I had been on the phone with a friend, and, he's had to get off the phone very quickly. And he said, I got to go. There's a family emergency. I've got to go. I'll call you later. And I was like, oh, gosh, okay. As soon as I hung up that phone, I picked up a pen, piece of scrap paper was already on my desk. I wrote down 3 words without thinking a thing. I wrote male cousin suicide. And I thought, oh, God, where did that come from? No sooner did I write down those 3 words when a beam of light that was easily, just like this, came over my right shoulder from the ceiling of the office, which was on the 2nd floor. So that's the highest floor in the house, comes through the ceiling over my right shoulder, hits, I had a piece of glass covering the top of the wooden desk. And on top of that, was what they call a butterfly paperclip. So it was a big paperclip. It was probably about this big. And it was almost like, honestly, 3 intersecting pyramids made up this butterfly paperclip in metal that was sitting on the desk. This beam of light hits the metal paperclip, sparks one end of it, and I'm sitting there going, oh my God, sparks it, and it sizzles the entire shape of the metal paperclip. And when it came to the other end of it, it made this really loud pop sound. And I just sat there going, oh my God, what the heck just happened? But I didn't really have any fear. It was weird. And I just thought, holy cow, this is incredible. Because, what I witnessed, this was a beam of light, first off, coming in the room, and it was able to ignite a piece of metal. Now, how does that happen? And I could watch it with my eyes go along the whole shape of this metal paperclip. And what's interesting is it did not, maybe if this was laying on my wooden desk without the glass top, it might have been a different story, but there was no mark underneath. I pick up the paperclip. It had a little faint heaviness to it and a little warm, nothing crazy. No sign of burn or anything. And same with the glass, no sign of there having been a burn mark, which it reminds me of when you're a kid, you have the firecrackers, the sparklers. It was like that. It sparked and sparkled the entire shape of the paperclip. And so this beam of light had an energy source. It was, I mean, crazy. And then to top it off, I get a phone call back from that gentleman I was speaking to. And he says to me, I said, gosh, is everything okay? And I didn't mention what just happened to me. And he said, yeah. He said, gosh, he said, my cousin John shot himself in his mother's house. Male cousin suicide. And I didn't tell him the story. I just was trying to console him. And but I think there's some connection there. I'm not sure what. I'd welcome your thoughts to that experience. The beam of light. Obviously psychically, I'm picking up on what's happening there on John's cousin. I mean, yeah, cousin John shot himself. So I don't know. Was there like this little strange portal of energy that opened? I honestly don't know. I mean, that is hands down one of my most unusual experiences. Just to see that light on a piece of metal. I mean, that makes no sense to me. Because I've never seen metal burn like that, ever. I don't think it's possible, to be honest with you. I don't know.
Have you ever met his cousin?
No, this was a friend. And his cousin John was the one, sorry, I kind of mixed the names up there, who shot himself in his mother's house. Yeah. So that was interesting.
I'm getting back to your ET encounters, let's say. Are you aware if you were ever abducted?
Well, I woke up in the middle of what I think most people would consider an abduction. I'll share that story with you. I'm in this house I'm in now, and I have a little den off of my kitchen and to the fireplace. And then off that little den is my bedroom. And all of a sudden, again, I'm asleep, I'm in bed, and all of a sudden, I'm not in bed. I am levitated up. I'm what feels like I'm being held by unseen hands, which I'm levitated up. I am up to where the ceiling is in this den area. And I'm like this. It's almost like my head's almost touching the ceiling. And I can remember, and again, it was like the sleep paralysis thing. I can remember I could move my eyes and I could see into my bedroom. And the creepiest thing was my bed was empty. I thought, oh my God. And I can remember being up there going, oh my God. And I just tried to call out literally to God, just like to pray and go, my God, help me. Um, Nothing happened. And then I thought, okay, I'm calling my teacher. I have had a very powerful spiritual teacher. His name is Zenos. And the minute I thought of him, I called out to him. And that's when the whole thing flipped. I'm no longer up there. I'm back in my bed. It was like a jarring thing. But then I must have just gone right back to sleep. But the next morning, I remember it full on. I mean, it wasn't a dream. At least it didn't at all feel like a dream. I had full recall of what happened. To this day, when I talk about this experience, I um I I can picture myself up there. I can picture being up so close to the ceiling. Now, I don't know what that was. Could that have been me waking up in the middle of something? I don't know. To this day, I don't honestly know. And it's interesting, and having talked to other folks now, having similar experiences, you know, oftentimes you're not allowed to remember certain things. They'll take you to a place, they'll allow you to see something, they'll allow you to have a certain amount of an encounter. Like, for instance, trying to take a photograph of some of the ships I've seen. Nothing comes out, nothing. I mean, I've got a camera, I'm thinking I've got it on video, and I've got nothing. So, perhaps this encounter, I wasn't meant to remember or recall that experience. Perhaps because honestly, it would have brought a lot of fear. And then I had my teacher, who at that point was in spirit, um, help me. I don't know. Yeah, it remains an enigma, that one.
I've had two up close UFO encounters, and both were flybys, of course, but just above the tree line. And,
Me.
and I don't recall being taken at all. Even my folks saw the craft, and
Really?
but my dad started having contact.
Oh my goodness.
So,
Okay. Isn't it interesting? Not that this has happened to me, but I certainly know a lot of others who it seems to run in family that more than one person in a family will have these experiences. Wow. Does it bring you fear? Do you have fear around them?
no, no.
No.
I've lived in these types of events all my life, and yeah, I had my mom to share these experiences with, so I wasn't really afraid. Okay. My grandmother had, well, I found this out like years after she passed away, but she would have a lot of dreams about flying. So I would have loved to nitpick her brain and try to
Yeah.
find what's happening. To get back to your story, now you've traveled quite a bit. Could you talk about some of the mystic visions you had at sacred sites?
Yeah, what seems to happen in the big picture that is now my life, um, I refer to, I'm guided to these sacred sites. And I'm usually always provided with a safe way to get there, usually in a group setting. In fact, many of my experiences traveling to these sacred sites back in the day were with William Henry and his wife Claire. William, I don't know if you know of William, is on Ancient Aliens. He's a producer, writer, one of the stars on Ancient Aliens, and he does guided tours, and a lot of his, and it was by a lot of synchronicity that we ended up connecting and meeting. And I ended up going to Egypt with them. Most of my travel around the world has been with them. So, again, my guides provide me with the safe way to go on and have these, what I call my sacred travels. And I'll share one quick interesting thought that can kind of connect this. Um, early on in my journey, before a lot of this stuff was happening, I just had this urge, and I was drawn to take some healing modalities. Reiki was the first healing modality I trained in. I went to level 2. My teacher, Nancy, was a very powerful gal. She, she could communicate to spirit. She could see past lives when she read somebody. She just was a remarkable lady. And I had a reading with her. And she had all my guides come in, and she's like, "Ooh, a lot of your guides, they're here. And they are telling me, Kathy, they're showing me that you're standing on the edge of a cliff and you've got your toes curled over this cliff, and they're asking you if you're ready to jump in." And I did not hesitate. I knew exactly what she meant. And I said, "Yes, I'm jumping in." And they assured me there'd be a safety net there for me. And boom, I jump in. And honestly, ever since that time, I have been fast tracked. All of this starts now happening. So right shortly after I had that experience, I'm guided to go. There was this local woman who was a channeler, and she, that particular day, night, she was going to be at a little healing center, and she was going to be channeling Mother Mary. So I thought, oh, feel very close to all that. And so I thought, okay, I went with some friends. So we sit, there was a packed house, and you could see when she started, you could see the change in her, almost like a transfiguration kind of thing. You could almost feel this difference in her. Felt very legit to me. Um, and she was delivering beautiful messages from Mother Mary. And she was delivering messages as a whole. And then she starts walking over to where I'm sitting, and she comes right up to me. And the Blessed Mother she's channeling, said to me, and she looked at me right in the eyes. She said, "You are going to be doing sacred travel. You're going to be traveling all over the world." I sat there. Of course, everybody's turning around to look. And that was her message to me directly from Mother Mary. And I thought, wow, how in God's name is all that going to happen, Well, honestly, from the toes over the edge of the cliff to that Mother Mary channel, I am on this fast track. I am now going to these sacred places. I am reliving past lives. That seems to be a theme here again with me in this journey, is one of past life remembrance. Many things that I, had in past lives, in particular, my healing is all coming forward now. So I'm training in different modalities. I've got my Egyptian healing rods right behind me. That was another thing that came through, and I knew that this was something I did in a past life. So all of that is very connected. So for instance, I will go to these sites, and I've trained in opening the Akashic records. And what's happened now is that I don't have to really go through much of a process. I can tap into the Akashic realm when I'm at these sacred sites. So a lot of what happens is I'm allowed to see these sites in truly their ancient glory. And that happened throughout these places I would be traveling to. And I would often be able to, I'll have the experience of, I know it's strange to even say, but I would have the experience of I will go into this past life. So for instance, in Egypt, I was at the Sphinx, and, between the paws of the Sphinx, and it is magnificent to be there, there is an altar piece. Now, I have to say to you, in all the pictures I've seen of the Sphinx over the years, I never noticed or seen this altar piece. And I am drawn to this altar piece when I got to the Sphinx. Everybody's roaming around. We had gone to Egypt in 2014 with William and Claire Henriette. That's a group. And it was very quiet at all of these sites because they had just had a revolution in, I believe it was 2012. So the tourism industry had taken a hit. So we were pretty much the only ones there at the Sphinx. And I'm drawn to this altar piece. And so most of my friends, everybody's scattered away. This is typically what my guides do with me. If I am to have an experience, I'm usually alone. And I'm standing right in front of this altar. And there's 4 what looked like ground-in holes in the altar. And I can remember looking at them and going, "What the heck was that? What was that for?" And I no sooner had that thought where I am, and again, I don't know if this is a time slip. I'm not quite sure what this is. I'm out of my body. I'm in another body. I'm looking down at myself out of the eyes from this other body, and I see myself. I'm a female. I'm dressed all in white. I am holding this infant that's swaddled in this beautiful golden and white cloth, and I'm leading a procession. And I have priests behind me, and we're approaching this altar. And the altar has 4 poles coming up from the 4 holes that I had noticed, and it was draped in this beautiful golden cloth. And there's a whole group of priests that are behind this altar now in that space between the paws of the Sphinx. I remember noting the Sphinx hat was painted. I did not see, this kills me, I did not see the head. I was only focused at the area where I was standing, where this altar was. I did not see up to know, because I would love to know. My thoughts on the Sphinx is that it originally had a lion's head. But I have to say to you, the coloring of the paws was like a golden brown color that you would associate with a lion. I remember noting that. And so I approached this altar with my entourage, and there's a head priest who comes and stands behind the altar to greet me. I am very detached holding this baby, and I pass this baby over to this priest on the other side of the altar. And that's when whatever was happening, the vision, the time slip stops. And I'm back in my body. I'm me. And I stood there and I thought, "Oh my God, what did I just witness?" And full recall, wasn't, like I had a dream or anything. I'm there and I'm awake. And but that's what happens. So now, whether for me, it's because I can tap into your Akasha. So I'm tapping into not only the Akasha of the sacred location, but also of me, of a soul, past life. I tapped into who I was while I'm there, when I was there. And I now know of numerous past lifetimes I've had in Egypt. And so that trip through Egypt was remarkable on so many levels. And I've written about it. It's been published in Phenomena magazine as well as Outer Limits magazine. It was an incredible, incredible trip. And it truly was a trip of many, many lifetimes. And so I don't know, to me, it almost feels like it could be a time slip, but that I'm jumping into another lifetime. And I'm like clearly seeing through those eyes, and I could see myself. That was what I thought was remarkable, is I could see and that's happened before. Um, so yeah, that's just one piece of my sacred travel that, it appears my past lives are key to a lot of what goes on.
So I believe you're a very old soul to have gone.
Oh yeah. I think beyond this earth realm. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, you talked about it, living out a time slip, but you also had another time slip in Herculaneum.
Yeah, that was an unsettling whole thing. So I'm in Italy with friends again, William and Claire Henry. We went in ahead of the tour that they were going to be doing through Italy, and so we went early and we stayed in um, Naples. And with the idea that we were the following day, going to go, we had hired a car together and we were going to go to Herculaneum and Pompeii, which are remarkable. And we, and part of, we went to this wonderful museum in Naples, the archaeological museum in Naples, and it has all the artifacts of Herculaneum and Pompeii. Remarkable place. Kind of set us up for where we are going, obviously the next day. So we start in Herculaneum, which I have to be honest with you, I had no idea. I had no preconceived anything about Herculaneum. I mean, I knew of Pompeii, many of us do, but I never knew of Herculaneum and how that was devastated as well. And Herculaneum was almost like, this beautiful, back in the day, this beautiful, playground for the rich. It's right on the water. It's, one of these, you had to be a wealthy person to afford to have a home there. So and honestly, Herculaneum is more intact, uh, than Pompeii. It's remarkable. So if anybody's gonna go, I would highly recommend putting Herculaneum on your list as well as Pompeii. So I was not prepared for this part of my journey into Herculaneum. We go in, as you go into where the site is, there's these big arched boat, done out of stone, boat. I don't know what you'd call them. They used to store their boats in these arched areas, and there are still, even though there's some, metal grid work that's covering the beginning, the fronts of these, arched boat areas, they are full of people who perished, bones. The bones are there. They're not encased like you found in Pompeii. They're not encased they're actually it really unsettled me to see that. I did not expect that. So I just was thinking, good Lord, what am I going to pick up on from all of this? And we start walking through Herculaneum. I did some prayer work around that, trying to see if there was any souls that needed any assistance. And it felt very quiet, I have to say. It was very interesting, for the trauma that it happened there. So I'm walking through Herculaneum and going into these stunningly survived villas. And William, Claire, and my friend Carol, we were all in one villa together looking, and then I felt drawn to go across the street, and the streets are very narrow, paved, stone paved roads. And I go into this other villa, and it was again remarkably intact. And there was this pillar, and then on top of it was this beautifully intact bronze statue of whoever the owner was of that villa. And then I leave there, and all of a sudden it was like really quiet. And mind you, there were hundreds of people in Herculaneum at the time. And I go across the street, my friends are gone. Nobody's in that villa. I look around, there's nobody around me. And I'm going, oh God, what is going on here? I'm calling for them. I'm walking up and down streets, and there was nobody there. It was so strange. And I couldn't find them. No reply as I yell out. And then I'm like halfway through Herculaneum, and I'm approaching. I thought I'd head back to where the boat houses are and go back to the beginning of going into Herculaneum, what's left. And so I'm at a crossroads. And it was must have been in the day, a major thoroughfare. And I can remember noticing there were groove marks from where wooden carts, must have over many years made ruts in the stone, paved roads, stone, not paved per se, but inlaid stone roads. And when all of a sudden, I'm literally in the middle of this crossroad. And again, now I don't know if this is a time slip. It felt like it would have been. I'm all of a sudden there. I'm in Herculaneum as all of this is coming down. And I'm in that crossroads, and I see and hear this sound of just people screaming and running, many of them heading down to the water with carts. And the loudest noise at that point were the cart wheel sounds on the stone. And their belongings are piled up in these carts. There were, animals running. I mean, it was chaos. And then I hear, or had to experience, the um the rushing, and again, that was a sound of its own, extremely loud sound of the rushing of the lava. And then you could feel and hear the water. And exactly where I was standing, the two meet. And there was this sound, like I can't even explain it. I can't honestly explain it. And it rocked me. And I thought, oh my God, make this stop, please. I don't even know who I was talking to, but it's just like, make this stop. I don't want to see this devastation. I don't want any of this around me. And it it started to dissipate. And I can remember I was standing there and I can remember thinking, why did I have why? Why did I have to relive that horror of that day? And I was so shaken. I remember thinking, I'm just going to walk down to where the water is. I'm going to walk to where we first came in. Maybe they're there waiting for me. Because again, nobody's around me. My friends are gone. So God, I had a hard time collecting myself out to that. And I did go down, and sure enough, they were there. They were kind of up on a hill from where we entered. And they knew the minute they saw me. They come up and they're like, "Are you okay? What happened?" And I shared with them what happened. And I just had to get out of there. I did not want to be in that place anymore. But to have the experience of that minute piece of when that whole town was devastated, it it, it stays with you. That was a hard one. Um, that still unnerves me, honestly. And then from there, we go to Pompeii. So it's like, oh God, Pompeii was quiet for the most part. Yeah. So I didn't have that crazy experience there, thankfully. That was reserved for Herculaneum for some reason.
Well, I do understand it from a soul purpose point of view. Yeah, it's all
Like,
was.
okay.
And but also you're also you've become a like a voice for them for for the horror that happened during those
Oh
days.
my God.
Yeah.
That makes sense, doesn't it? Wow. Thank you for that. Yeah, that was some, oh God, still gives me shivers.
Yeah. You had an out of body experience in front of the Shroud of Turin.
Oh, this is a big story or experience, I should say. Wasn't a story. Um, yeah, and again, actually that was the same trip. So I had that experience in Herculaneum. I had a spirit encounter in Pompeii. Then we go to our last stop through that beautiful trip through Italy, which I love Italy. Um, was we went to Turin, Italy, to see the shroud. Now, the shroud was on display in this church, big basilica in Turin, Italy, and it was due to come down. We were there, oh, I think we were there in April. It was due to come down in June, and it's still not back up. And supposedly it was going to be down for 25 years. I guess they do restoration work to it, or they just take it down to preserve it, so it's not out in the air and all that, even though it's encased. But so it was quite something for us to score, getting in to see the shroud. And I can remember, um, feeling, gee, such just reverence to be able to stand in front of the shroud. And I've always had the feeling that the shroud was genuine. I just always had that knowing. And so when I went in front of the shroud, I also knew something else. I had a woman who was one of my teachers. I was taking integrated energy therapy training. And she had said to me, and again, she could see a lot of things, and she knew I was going to Italy and going to be in front of the shroud. And she said to me, and I'm glad she said this to me. She said, when you're there, make sure you have somebody hang on to like the back of your shirt or your sweater, just to ground you, to keep a hold of you. She said, because I have a feeling you're going to have an out of body experience. So you need somebody to make sure they're grounding you. And I never forgot that. So when I was there, I was standing next to my friend Carol, and I told her about this, and I said, do me a favor, hang onto the back of my shirt. So it's an experience even just getting into the church of Turin where the shroud is. So you go through this whole maze of lines to get in, and then you finally get into this area um in the rear of the church where they show you this movie. God, that was a hard one to watch. It was an extremely well done video of zooming in to the shroud, to different parts of Jesus's body, to see the absolute devastation to his body. And, and when it zooms in, you see it up close, you're seeing the dried blood. You're seeing thorns. I mean, it's remarkable. And I start crying. I mean, just tears coming down my face. And I thought, oh my God, what this man went through. So that sets you up to go into the church proper where the shroud is. And what's interesting is they stagger the line. So our group got to stay together to go in to stand at the altar in front of the shroud together. And she kind of sectioned off, the line. So we had our little time there. And I was right up front and center. And I could feel the energy coming off the shroud. And I knew without a doubt in my mind that this was real. It felt so real and powerful. And I can remember standing there and all of it. And I can remember my friend Carol had the back of my shirt. And all of a sudden, I'm out of my body. I go up to what I can only describe as the God realms. It was a place that it's even hard to try and describe. It, the place I was in was just all black, but yet I was a point of light, and I came into a group of points of light, and I knew who these people were. They were Jesus, Yeshua, the Marys, Mother Mary, Mary Magdalene, and Sophia, who is the goddess of knowledge. She's a very powerful goddess. So they're there. And I come in. It's like I'm coming into the middle of a meeting. And so it's like I knew who they were, even though they were points of light. And they knew who I was. And I honestly don't recall what they told me. And that gets me to this day. I have a sense someday I'll know when the timing's right. But what I do know they said to me is all of a sudden they all come forward and they say to me, it's time for you to go back. You have to go back. And I stood there and I said, I don't want to go back. I mean, this place was incredible. I mean, beautiful, just love. I found it interesting. It wasn't full of light like people talk about when they have near-death experiences or whatever. This place was black, and I intuitively knew it was a God realm. It was the realm of the God. Where that came from, I don't know, but that's the term that came to me as I was there. So they said to me, no, you got to go back. So literally, I go back. I had the hardest time going back into my body. And thank God Carol was there, because I don't know if I could have come back in. And I come back in, I'm like reeling. And it was interesting because the woman who was holding the line up, letting just certain people in, like after a group goes, she prods you to leave to let the next group come in. She had let us stay for me to have this experience. So we were there much longer than the norm. And she was watching me. So they all knew something happened to me. And she kind of looked at me and kind of gave me a look, like nodded. And I'm back in my body, and Carol's helping me, and we're kind of, but I turned around to leave. And who was behind me but 3 nuns, 3 little nuns too. They were very young, very lovely little young nuns in full nun regalia. And they were kneeling in prayer right behind me. Now, I intuitively had a sense that they knew what was happening there too, that they were there as anchors as well. And I can remember I turned around, I bowed down to them, they bowed down to me, and they're already on their knees, mind you. And I thanked them. And then we made our way out and beyond. And could barely stand. It was ridiculous. I could barely walk. And my friends brought me to this part of the chapel area where there's just kneeling benches, for people to kneel in front of the shroud, away from the front. And I can remember having a hard time breathing. I can remember just being extremely lightheaded. And um, I did not know for the longest time really what happened. Although I had this sense that something big was going to happen. Because I can remember, I know this is going to sound crazy. I can remember being in that line, going to see the movie. The whole time I'm in the line getting to the shroud, I had this whole thing going in my head. Please, because I knew something was going to happen. Please just do not let me have the stigmata. That's all I wanted to know. Whatever happens, great. I do not want to come out of there with a stigmata. I don't want that part of my experience. I was very active about that. And I don't know where that thought came from, honestly. A stigmata. I'm just like, okay. So, but what's even more interesting is and I should have started with this point, so I'm sorry. But when Carol and I were sharing a room, so we're at the hotel before we get on the bus to go to Turin, to the church. We anointed ourselves. She brought a whole bunch of sacred oils, Young Living sacred oils. So she's anointing herself with everything. And she's like, "Do you want any sacred oils?" And I said, "Oh, yeah, I'll just have the myrrh." So I anointed myself with myrrh. And she proceeded, and I watched her do it, put all of the little vials of the sacred oils into her bag she had, in a plastic bag, in her bag. And she gets to the, we're in the line going into the church. And she said to some of our folks, she says, "Hey, I got my sacred oils. Any of you guys want to, use any of the oils?" Nobody asked for the myrrh. Nobody used the myrrh. I was the only one that had anointed myself with the myrrh. So I think that had a piece in all this. And only to then, I really had to sit for quite a while outside of the church to really collect myself and it come back to being me. And we come back to the hotel, and I can remember thinking, that's funny, nobody wanted the myrrh. And we come back to the hotel, and standing right in front of the doorway of our room is the vial of myrrh. And I'm like, okay, this is weird. I saw her pack this in her bag in the plastic. So how the myrrh got there, I have no clue. But interesting, it was just the myrrh. And I was the only one anointed with the myrrh. So, that has a piece to that story too. So that was remarkable. Yeah, I went to the God realm on that one.
Amazing. And
Yeah, and I'd love to hope that, maybe I'll get some more messages, find out really what we were chatting about up there, other than when they had to send me back.
now, in March of 2014, you had a lot of synchronicities, which brought you to a trip to Egypt. That's a big trip.
So
Well, it's a big story, so let's get into that one.
that is a big story. So I'm thinking, I already shared one part of that, and that really was in the beginning, because we went to the Sphinx and Giza Plateau the first day, and really to spend more time with this in the Sphinx area. And so that the most incredible part of this whole story experience is that before I left for Egypt, 2 weeks before I left, I had a birthday. So we ended up leaving the end of February. So my birthday's February 8th. So I had a reading from a medium for my birthday. And she, they had some, loved ones in spirit kind of come through, nothing earth shattering. And then all of a sudden, like Nancy had, she says, this medium says, "Ooh, this is a different person." She says, "I've got all of your guides here." And she's like, "Wow." She goes, they want me to tell you a message. I'm like, "Oh, okay." So they said to me, when you're in Egypt, 3 things are going to happen to you: soul retrieval, astral projection, and an alien encounter. So it's like, what? So I can remember thinking, okay, again, how is any of this going to happen? And well, I will tell you a long, big story. Sure enough, all three things did happen. And the you know, going, it was our very. I'll jump to the Great Pyramid. That last day that full last day we were in Egypt, we had private time to go into the Great Pyramid. And, so, our bus pulls up. We're all, like, so excited. I couldn't wait. I had brought my Egyptian healing rods that are behind me here, and I had them, tucked in, my pockets and thinking I knew I was guided that this trip was honestly set up for me to get those into the Great Pyramid. So that was front and center in my mind, and we had our guides go up, check in with the guards who are at the entrance of the pyramid, and they come back, on the bus, and they're like, "Okay, we just met with the guards. The Egyptian Antiquities Authority has forbid bringing in anything into the pyramid, so we couldn't bring in our phones, couldn't bring in anything, because the day before, if you can imagine this, somebody carved their name into the wall going up the grand staircase in the Great Pyramid. Now, who in God's name does that? So because of that, they clamped down, and we were told, you can't bring anything in. So some of us kind of like were sneaking in some little, stones and crystals and whatnot. Well, I had my healing rods, which, they're like this big, two big solid, one copper, one zinc. And my friend Michael, who was with me, says, he had big, heavy sweatshirt on. He said, Kathy, give me the rods. I'll put them in my really super deep pockets. They won't find me. Like, oh my God, thank you so much. So Michael's ahead of me in the line. We all get up to where the entrance is, and the guards are frisking everybody. And that's usually not the norm. And so I go through, no problem. Poor Michael, he gets stopped. They find my Egyptian healing rod. So our guide, Emil, who was the doll, he argued crazy arguments in Egyptian with the guards saying, these are healing tools. She just wants to bring them in. She's not going to do any harm with them. They would not listen. So I was so upset and angry, honestly, that I went ahead of Emil. He's still at the doorway. I go up and in, and you go up, into what they call the grand stairway, the grand gallery, and you go up those stairs. I had sent you some pictures of this, and it's very rickety. You got to bend down because it's all carved in stone. And I'm going up, and I'm mad, and I'm thinking, oh, damn, I'm supposed to have my Egyptian healing rods in here with me. And only to hear from behind me, Emil, in a big whisper, Kathy, I got the rods in. They let me bring in the rods. Only I can carry them. So he's got them in his two pockets. So I'm like, thank you, Emil. Thank you so much. So he and I go up, our whole group goes up into the king's chamber. Wow. That place is remarkable on every single level. The whole thing is, but you go into the king's chamber, and what really strikes you is there's nothing in there except for a sarcophagus carved in red granite stone that's down the other end of the room, and it's backlit, so it's very eerie looking. And you can't help but notice there's no adornment on the walls. There's no hieroglyphs, no paint, no nothing. It's just stone walls. And they are so intricately fit together. You couldn't even put a credit card between. And there's no mortar, there's nothing else. Everything was precisely fit to create this pyramid. It's remarkable to see in person. And so we sit down, and Emil is to my left, and he's a riot. He keeps grinning at me, patting his pockets like, strap the rods. I'm like, yes. So each one of us had a turn to go up and go into lay in the sarcophagus. And that's part of the, whole experience. Is you go in and you have what is kind of termed an initiation. You go in and lay down in the sarcophagus. And So everyone, I knew intuitively I needed to go last. So I had asked William and Claire on the QT, do you mind if I go last? They're like, yeah, no, sure, fine. So everybody has their turn going up, and then it's my turn. And I can remember standing up because we were sitting on the ground. I can remember standing up, and I started walking to the sarcophagus, which is on the other end of the room. And I had this overwhelming feeling of having been there before. And I thought, oh, where's that coming from? And so I go up to the sarcophagus, and it was almost like, Jan, it was like something else took over. And I step into the sarcophagus. So I had Claire on my left, William on the right, and my friend Carol came up behind. So I turn around and I'm facing the group, and I bowed down to them, and you could hear this kind of sound. And then I bowed to Claire, to Carol, to William. So I bowed to the four corners, and I laid down on the sarcophagus. And the last conscious thought I had was that I stopped breathing. That's the last thing I remember. And then I can remember William literally having to reach into the sarcophagus and shake me by my toes. Kathy, Kathy, Kathy. So again, I come back into my body, and whoa, I was having a hard time breathing, very jarring. And they helped me out. And then our other guide, Hatim, who was a wonderful, wonderful man, he saw me, and he said to William and Claire, I truly felt like I was straddling two worlds. It was an incredible feeling. And he said to them, she needs time to just get her bearings. I'll stay here with her. And they all went down to the Queen's chamber. And Hatim came up to me, and he points to his third eye, and he says, I see you. He says, you've been here before. You were an initiate. And as soon as I hear that, I knew that I have been here before. I mean, that was something I truly felt. And so, I kind of get myself together. I go down to the Queen's chamber. Claire had come back up, and she's like, Gabby, you got to come down to the Queen's chamber. I'm like, okay. Hachim's like, all right, she's coming. So I go back down the ladder, back down the steps to the Queen's chamber. So as you go into the Queen's chamber, again, you note that there's no sarcophagus in the Queen's chamber. It's totally empty. But again, no adornment, no hieroglyphs, paint, nothing. And again, with the incredible stonework of everything fitting just right. And there are two air shafts in the Queen's chamber. So as you go in the door, and the door is kind of short, and I'm 5'3", I had to even duck down into the doorway. And as you go in, immediately to the right is the north-facing air shaft. Now, I come in this room, and I could vaguely know friends of mine are there. Everybody's kind of doing their thing. And I'm drawn to this air shaft. And I immediately go to this air shaft, and I put my face into this ancient air shaft. Now, no clue why that is. I mean, normally I don't know. I don't think that would have been my first thing to do, but there I am. And of course, you can see the air shaft, literally, honest to God, was like an 8x10, 8x11. My face just fully fit right into the air shaft. And again, I sent you a picture. And it's about my height. So it was ridiculous. It was the exact same. I just had to lean in and put my face in there. And I did without thinking twice. And I could see the sides of the air shaft, and then it gets dark, and it's pitch black at the end. And I can, remember noting that. And I have my face in there, and I'm watching, and I'm thinking, and I have no fear. I don't even think to myself, get your face out of there. What are you doing? And all of a sudden, this beautiful pink light appears. It's like a pink red light. And it comes up, it appears in an arch shape, which I can remember going, this is interesting. It's like an arched window. And as I'm looking at this pink light, trying to figure that out, I see what starts to come up into the field of this arched window and this pink red light. At the end of this air shaft is this rounded, like looked like a little head. And it kept coming up, coming up. Sure enough, it's a head. And my first thought about this being I was seeing coming up was that its head was oval and it wasn't shaped like a grace. That was a clear thought I had. So I made a note of that. And it had like little ears. It had big dark eyes, but not as big as a gray's. You know, the gray's big eyes, they tend to take the whole face shape. This big eyes, but not as big as a gray's. And pitch black. And I didn't notice really particularly a nose or a mouth, but that this being, what was emanating from this being was such love and happiness. And I can remember going, oh God. And really feeling that, thinking, wow. And then this being started communicating to me telepathically. And it said that they were so happy that they could now show themselves to me and that I wouldn't be afraid. And I can remember thinking, oh my God, I'm not afraid. And I can remember feeling happy about that. And then this being said, they come in peace and do not mean us any harm. He tells me that they have come here many years ago. They helped establish many of our ancient civilizations, the Egyptian civilization in particular, and that they walked the earth plane at one point and helped establish ancient Egypt in the days of its glory. And that that now that I'm not afraid, they will come back, and that they are very happy that I'm holding no fear. And then it just started to kind of fade away. The light started to fade away. He started to fade away. And again, I'm left with this most incredible, incredible feeling of love and of happiness like I've never experienced before. And again, I had not an ounce of fear. And I thought, then I took my face out of the shaft and I stood there. And again, only to realize I'm alone. And I thought, okay, I just had an incredible experience. Holy cow. And then I'm thinking to myself, oh my God, which I truly wasn't carrying in my mind going through Egypt, were those three things that it was foretold I would have an alien encounter. Now, I kind of wrote that off, honestly, as, yeah, right, you know? Well, here I am standing at an air shaft, and I just had an incredible encounter with, I don't know what, but I, I can, so as soon as I'm getting my bearings here and having those thoughts, I hear from up above in the King's Chamber, my whole group evidently went back up to the King's Chamber, and they're toning. And just using their voices, no words, and the sound was otherworldly, was the best way I could describe it. William did take a video, I'm sorry, a recording of it. They allowed only William to bring in his phone because he was the head of the group. And it was the very first thought I had as I stood and listened to this remarkable sound was, this is the music of the spheres, Pythagoras' theory. I don't know why that came into my head. And again, I'm not very schooled on Pythagoras, but yet that whole thought came into my head and I thought, oh my God. And this is truly otherworldly, what I'm hearing. So I'll fast forward. I get home and my dear friend Linda, who was dying to get together to hear about my experiences. So we meet for lunch. I share with her what I just shared with everyone, my experience in the Great Pyramid and the Queen's Chamber and seeing this being. And she goes in her bag she had with her and she pulls out this book that's behind me. I should get it and show you. It's Tom Kenyon's book, Tom Kenyon and Virginia Assini, and they channel these beings called the Hathors. Now, Linda pulls this book out of her bag, okay? And she says to me, have you ever heard of Tom Kenyon? And I said, no, I never heard of Tom Kenyon. She opens this book and she starts reading to me about these Hathors describing themselves. So I'll read to you because it's a remarkable quote. It says, again, confirming what I was told, is that they had been here. They Hathor spoke about coming in during and before the Egyptian period, approximately 10,000 BC, which I think is a key date, after the fall of Atlantis. And in quotes, it says, "We are masters of sound and love from an ascended intergalactic civilization. As we once assisted in Egypt and Tibet, we have returned to assist in humanity's current potential evolution." And he said, as they say, "We come in love with the sounding of a new dream reality for your earth." Now, that's basically pretty much the message I got from this being. And it goes on to say in their channeled words, "We made contact with the early Egyptians through the goddess Hathor, which they experienced through mystical visions. Through the cult of the goddess, we were able to help the Egyptians create a spiritual golden age, which culminated in the creation of the mystery schools," which is key, because the Great Pyramid is part of the mystery schools. "Through these esoteric centers, we were able to assist with the training of initiates, a positive influence which spread throughout the world. The influence of these mystery schools is still active in the world." So how remarkable is that? That here's my friend Linda, and she's an old soul. She can communicate to spirit. I mean, she's a very open soul. I thought it was remarkable. I mean, I would have no idea what I saw had she not pulled out this book. And that's truly who I communicated with, was the Hathor. And what was really fascinating is, without me knowing it, all going through Egypt, I was taking pictures of Hathors in all the temples. And in many of the temples, the Hathor was being depicted on the very top of columns to these massive temples. You'd see the carved face. And that's something else they reference in the book, that they were portrayed in these carvings, in the stone temples, was something they requested. And what I find interesting about what they said is that only people who were clairvoyant could see them when they walked the earth plane. So not everybody saw these beings. And so I find it interesting. I'm a clairvoyant. I find the whole thing so fascinating. You know, my connection to Egypt. I'm a clairvoyant. I have these, experiences with extraterrestrials, and here I am having an exchange with this Hathor being from an interplanetary whole dimension. Wow. Okay. So this just upped the ante like 100 times. And I thought, wow, how cool is it? And thank you, the Hathors, for trusting that you could come to me, and for, sharing that message with me. And I was grateful that I could receive that. And I really feel part of my experience is one that I'm meant to share. And I am writing a book about a lot of my experiences, this in particular. And again, this was featured. It was a 2-part, a whole series in Phenomena magazine, and to a smaller degree in Outer Limits magazine. But yeah, I'm meant to talk about this. I'm meant to share their thoughts, I had a good experience with the being I encountered. And I know, Jan, you have no doubt had folks on your show who have had a very unpleasant experience with, be it Grace, whoever the entities might be. So I'm very lucky in that I had a very cool experience. And yeah, this being was nothing but love. So I found that very interesting. There was no fear there for me. So I guess I was lucky with the experience I had.
Any plans of heading back to Egypt one day?
Well, not yet, but I know I'll be back. I mean, how can you have those experiences and not go back? So yeah, it's just a matter of, the universe lining it up for me. That's how they work. I know I'll be back. I now since have friends in Egypt. And of course, it was always the talk of, you got to come back, you got to visit, you got to this, that. So I'm hoping that, yes, that's going to happen. I'd love for it to happen sooner than later. It is truly a place of my soul. It really is. Yeah, I can't wait. So at some point, I'll be packing a bag and going back. It'll be interesting to see, what that trip brings. Seeing as this first time there was quite remarkable on many, many levels.
Oh, what an amazing story. Thank you so much for sharing.
Thank you. Thank you for the platform, for allowing me to share the story, and for giving the Hathors a voice through me.
Well, let's finish off the interview. Do you have a closing statement or a final story that you might want to get out?
Good question. Um, you know, there seems to be a big picture here for me. When you really go down my list of all that I've encountered, I've experienced, and as I had mentioned, so much of it is at these sacred sites that in antiquity and ancient times were already sacred sites, and that we're blessed to still have most of these sites still there that you can connect to. Um, and then again, it's just, I guess, it's just in that big picture, there seems to be a connection for me in a past life, so that I'm very grateful for the way it's been executed for me to have these experiences, have this sacred travel. And I honestly have met some of the most beautiful souls on this journey. And that to me is one of my biggest takeaways is that, if I could be a voice, and thank you for a platform to be a voice, because I think, those of us having these incredible experiences, I think it's, you know, number one, we need to be believed. And that I always say about my experience is my truth. And I live by that. I don't have to make this up. It's real. It's happened. But so often, in this field of the paranormal and of ufology, there is this sense of doubt. There's got to have proof, all of that. What I have learned in all I've been through is that you don't always need proof. That, your experience is your proof. And it just takes the right people to understand that and to believe you. And yeah, and I'm very grateful for you allowing me this time to speak and to share these experiences. And as I mentioned, I have been pushed not only by my guides, but by others who have come into my life who, telling me I've got to write this book. So it's in the process. I've been included in other people's books, some of my experience. So now it's time for me to have my book. So thank you. Yeah, this was a wonderful interview. Thank you so much for the time.
Thanks for coming on. Your story's a refreshing one, so thanks again for coming on and sharing your stories with us.
Thank you very much.
And to those watching, hope you enjoyed today's interview. I'm your host, Mr. Great. More interviews coming up, and I will see you guys next time. So take care, everyone. Hello, everyone. This is Mr. Great, and thanks for watching today's episode. If you are an abductee, contactee, or experiencer, and you believe that your story could help others, please feel free to contact me through my YouTube channel email. When it comes to experiencers, the ET phenomena, and the future, remember, truth will out.